Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the loss of Air India Flight 171. I'm Geoffrey Thomas and delighted to say once again joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you, Geoffrey.
Thank you. Viewers, this episode is a very special episode. It's called Failsafe, but how? Yesterday, a viewer, Hugh5699, asked the question, how can an aircraft fail safe on takeoff be by shutting down both engines? The FAA's regulatory framework explicitly requires that no single failure or combination of failures may cause an uncommanded or uncontrolled thrust in any phase of operation: start, taxi, takeoff, climb, cruise, descent, approach, or landing. A hazardous engine effect is defined under FAA Advisory Circular 33.28-1. It says uncontrolled or uncommanded change in thrust or power, or thrust power in the opposite direction to that commanded by the pilot, close of quote. 14 CFR 3328, Engine Control Systems. This directly governs full authority digital engine control, FADEC, or equivalent systems. The design and functioning of the control systems must ensure that no single failure or malfunction of the engine control system results in an unsafe condition, including uncommanded engine thrust or power change. An uncommanded thrust or power change is a hazardous event that must be prevented through system design, fault detection, and failure accommodation. The control system must not permit uncommanded engine operation, regardless of aircraft phase. Manufacturers must demonstrate that FADEC correctly interprets throttle lever angle, TLA commands, any short open circuit signal corruption or sense of failure does not cause a thrust increase without pilot input. Dual channel FADEC systems perform channel arbitration and fail-safe revision to prevent thrust surges. Richard.
Yes, strong and clear regulations. And we're showing a screenshot of the key regulations in a summary table. Engine control must not allow unsafe conditions or uncommanded thrust. No single failure or malfunction may result in a hazardous engine effect. And it requires detection of invalid data and safe reversion to prevent any thrust surges. So those are the key statements. The manufacturers, Boeing and GE, are FAA compliant. When you look at the Boeing documentation, it says failure of both CCR data channels results in engine shutdown command by the EEC. And when you look at the GE documentation, it says upon loss of valid throttle resolver or CCR link data, the EEC commands the fuel metering valve to close to prevent uncommanded thrust. So engine is shut down by the EEC when it detects a failure. And EEC commands the fuel metering valve to close.
So Richard, the design complies with the regulation. The engine is shut down by the EEC, which closes the fuel metering valve, correct?
That's correct. And it's an intentional fail-safe design to prevent uncommanded thrust and is therefore certification compliant.
Okay, so what about a dual engine failure at a critical phase of flight, like just after takeoff, as we saw with Air India 171?
Yes, and this is where it starts to get interesting. So pilot with the fuel switches is what we call a causation path, and that is the official hypothesis. And while a design common cause dual shutdown remains possible, but it is much less likely until, of course, disproven by the final investigation. Now, we disagree with the official hypothesis, and it's interesting, we're not alone. A Dr. Thomas of MIT predicted in 2016 a dual engine shutdown will happen and cautioned the FAA that a throttle control malfunction can lead to a dual engine flameout.
So, who is Dr. Thomas?
Yeah. Dr. Thomas is affiliated with MIT's Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and he serves in a leadership role in their Engineering Systems Laboratory, the ESL. He is also an executive director of the MIT Partnership for Systems Approaches to Safety and Security, an organization called PSAS. And Dr. Thomas predicted the dual engine shutdown in 2016 and again in 2018 in his study called Empirical Evaluations of STPA in the Aviation Industry. That's published by the Aeronautics and Astronautics Department of MIT.
So, Richard, what exactly did Dr. Thomas conclude?
Dr. Thomas gives a presentation of his work, and in one slide he shows a simplified example of the thrust control malfunction. He calls it a TCM. And that happens when the thrust lever angle on the thrust quadrant in the cockpit goes from idle to takeoff, go around thrust, TOGA. And the engine thrust obviously increases to a high level with TOGA. And if the TCM detects a problem, the thrust, for example, stuck high or thrust stuck low or thrust data invalid, then the engine shutdown occurs as the fuel flow is stopped. And we're including a link to his presentation as published on the MIT website in the description below. So you can take a look at that if you're interested. What the study focuses on is the so-called unsafe control actions. And it analyzes all of the possible unsafe control actions, either from a pilot or from the aircraft, from the various systems.
So, what about the dual engine shutdown?
And he points out there have been several dual engine flameouts, and up until the time of his study, which was dated 2023, he notes, fortunately, no fatalities until now. There was an ANA 787 incident on the 17th of January 2019, a dual engine shutdown after landing, and caused not by an engine failure, but by the system logic, a TCMA, that assumed a ground state combined with the thrust reverser input. And there was another incident with a Jetstar 787 on the 29th of March 2019. This was a dual engine malfunction due to fuel contamination. And what Dr. Thomas has done is gone through all aircraft incidents and all dual engine flameouts, and of course, many other different scenarios. And he presents his findings. And he's developed what is called the System Theoretic Process Analysis, STPA. And this is his study of unsafe control actions, both from systems and from humans. So, in the interaction between the system and the human pilot. And STPA analyzes hazardous state transitions triggered by both intended and unintended behaviors. And Dr. Thomas makes the case that a STPA analysis should be part of the certification process for all aircraft. He pointed out in 2016 that a throttle control malfunction can cause dual engine flameouts on aircraft certified without STPA.
So, is anybody listening to Dr. Thomas?
Yeah, I think everybody in the aviation industry is listening to Dr. Thomas. I'm showing a screenshot of the MIT case studies. They conducted between 2012 and 2017 216 STPA case studies with leading organizations in the aviation industry. So Boeing, Rolls-Royce, Pratt& and Whitney were all early adopters of STPA, with a number of case studies being presented. GE was a later entrant, and they don't have any published case studies so far, but I'm sure they will have some in the future.
So, Richard, if Boeing, Rolls-Royce, and Pratt and Whitney were all early adopters of STPA, why did GE only come late to the party?
That's a good question. We're showing a screenshot of the early adopters, and they've all published case studies with MIT on STPA. Rolls-Royce were the first, and one on engine control systems. Pratt& and Whitney did one also on engine control systems, but also on fuel control systems. And Boeing have done a number, and they're all sort of aircraft level systems. Rolls-Royce, yeah, were the first, but Boeing and Pratt& and Whitney followed very soon after. GE joined 4 years later, and they may well, meanwhile, have done case studies with STPA, but for some reason they haven't been published. So I'm looking
Mm.
forward to the first publication from GE.
So, everybody is listening, but are they actually implementing STPA?
That's a good point. Dr. Thomas reports in 2018 again that he points out that thrust control malfunctions have still happened since he first pointed it out in 2016, and again causing dual engine flameouts on aircraft certified without STPA. Again, he says at that point, fortunately, no accident. But there have been several incidents. For example, an aircraft landed and gets stuck on a runway, and the flight crew can't restart the engine, and the aircraft gets towed off the runway to a parking area, which is a little embarrassing.
Now, Richard, I understand that the FAA did a study on STPA in 2015. Do you know what they concluded?
Yeah, the FAA wanted to evaluate whether STPA could identify hazards missed by classical methods, FHA, FTA, FMEA, and CCA. The FAA wanted to integrate STPA earlier into system design phase for new aircraft. It also wanted to integrate STPA into their certification activities, and especially for safety critical software and hardware. And as you can imagine, aircraft designs have become more and more complex. So these older safety analysis methods were pushed to their limit. And STPA is a modern development and is specifically good when it comes to safety critical software and hardware and how they interact. So the FAA applied STPA to several real-world aviation systems, aircraft control, engine control, autopilot logic. And they did that together with Boeing, Pratt& Whitney, Rolls-Royce, NASA, and MIT. And their conclusion from their report, STPA provides significant safety value by identifying more causal factors than traditional methods and by integrating safety early in system design. It is recommended that the FAA continue research towards incorporating STPA within the certification guidance for complex software-intensive systems.
So did the FAA and EASA finally adopt STPA?
Yes, they did. But, and it's a big but, it took 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're showing the timeline of the adoption process. So the initial study in 2015, then there was follow-up research 2016 to 2018, then standardization, then formal guidance, and finally in the end of 2024, it was fully incorporated in the certification process. But 10 years is a long timeline for incorporating a proven safety analysis method into the certification guidance. But in the context of aerospace regulation and system safety standards, that pace is actually typical. And you could argue even quite fast for a paradigm shifting methodology like STPA. And the FAA and EASA operate on the principle of regulatory stability. STPA represent a fundamental philosophical shift from component failure analysis to system control and interaction analysis. And STPA is a control theoretic and qualitative method analyzing unsafe interactions even when no component fails. And of course, when lives are at stake, regulators prefer proven methods, and they're very conservative and not in favor of innovations. I've actually received emails from Boeing 787 engineers who think the pace of change is too conservative and actually slows down innovation.
So, Richard, how does this affect the Boeing 787 or other aircraft?
Well, we're showing a slide from Dr. Thomas' presentation on TCM in other aircraft. The throttle control malfunction can affect 25 other aircraft types. So quite a long list.
So, where does this leave the investigation into the crash of Air India 171 on the 12th of June 2025? Inevitable as predicted by Dr. Thomas or a result of an out of date regulatory framework?
I think it's probably somewhere in between inevitable and out of date regulatory framework. The preliminary report has been widely condemned as inadequate. And we know India's Supreme Court is hearing a petition for an independent probe, but the court hasn't yet ruled, and the petition is pending. Calling it inevitable is premature. Calling it a framework failure is also premature. And we've pointed out the maintenance track record of Air India, which we believe is also a significant factor.
Mm.
So we need the factual analysis in the final report or any court ordered independent review to answer that finally. The cause of thrust loss might be both fuel cutoffs moved, or it might be an electrical failure isolating the EEC from the CRS and going to the fail-safe mode. It could be a combination of the two. And it is easy and straightforward from the FDR data. If it is fuel cutoffs, then you'll be able to see the fuel control switch positions left and right versus the SPA fuel SOV position left and right against the N2 decay timestamps from the FDR data. If the FDR shows no commanded cutoff on the fuel switch discretes and they stay run, but the fuel metering valve goes to zero on both engines within a narrow time window, then it's the EEC. In my view, it's both of these at the same time. So we should see both fuel cutoffs and a dual EEC commanded fuel metering valve closure. And then the big question is, which of those came first?
Mm. So, what are the next steps, Richard?
Well, we would like the AAIB India to publish the FDR data and the CVR transcript, and simply the factual information without any comment. And that would be very helpful. We would also like the FAA to reproduce the crash scenario that we've presented and run a test to confirm that the EEC will close both fuel metering valves and cause a dual engine shutdown when the CRS to EEC AFDX link is lost temporarily. And the analysis, whether the fuel cutoffs or the EEC commanded cutoff came first, will then be quite straightforward.
Mm. Yes, this is getting more and more tragically fascinating by the day, is it not?
It is. And we said we're just taking layers off the onion
Mm.
day by day. But I think we're getting closer and closer to what is the root cause.
Look, absolutely. And Dr. Thomas's work really flags precisely what we had been, or you had been, suggesting.
Yes. And I had the privilege of receiving an email from Dr. Thomas yesterday. So we're now in contact and exchanging views and ideas.
Mm.
And in my thinking is that he was already on the right track back in 2016 in requesting the FAA to incorporate this STPA process into their compliance process, which they are now doing for any new aircraft going forward. But what we would like to see is obviously in the case of this accident, the first fatal accident with a 787, that we go back and retrospectively look at it from an STPA point of view.
And one would also suggest that STPA analysis be conducted for all aircraft types, because as you suggest, there's about 25, I think you said, that are impacted by this.
Yeah, and that is as of 2023 in the study. And
Mm,
I think since then, some of those have been ticked off the list, but you're quite right, they all need to be ticked off the list. And that's 25 other aircraft apart from the 787.
mm. Richard, thank you very much indeed for this amazing report. And I'm sure it's going to bring us a lot more questions. And so it'll be fascinating to see what the viewers think of this piece of work of yourself, and then, of course, Dr. Thomas of MIT. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And I have to say, almost over 2,000 comments and questions in the last
Mm,
10 days. So
mm.
it's a lot of interest.
There's a lot of interest. And as I've said to you, viewers, before, we actually do read them all. I can assure you, spending hours reading them all. And we do appreciate them very much indeed, even though some of them are a little bit challenging. We're up for it. So, viewers, we'll be back tomorrow with another episode looking at the loss of Air India 171 and analysing your feedback on this particular episode and the previous ones as well. So please do join us. Please subscribe to us. Please do like us. And we do look forward to your company tomorrow. Once again, Richard, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And viewers, do please tune in tomorrow. We look forward to your company. Thank you.